The air in Rivendell was thick with tension as the Council of Elrond deliberated. Frodo Baggins, clutching the One Ring, sat quietly, his heart pounding as voices rose and fell. The fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance, and the question of how to destroy the ring dominated the discussion. Gandalf, Elrond, Aragorn, and others debated the paths to Mordor, each route fraught with peril. But was the path they ultimately chose, the long, treacherous journey through the wilds, the worst possible route? The Council's decision was to form the Fellowship of the Ring, a small band tasked with carrying the ring to Mount Doom. Their planned route was to skirt the Misty Mountains, pass through the Gap of Rohan, and approach Mordor from the west. Yet, as Frodo would later learn, this path was riddled with dangers that might have been avoided. To explore whether the Fellowship took the worst route, we must first consider the alternatives and the reasoning behind their choice. The most direct route to Mordor was through the Black Gate, the Moran Non, a heavily fortified entrance guarded by Sauron's armies. This was dismissed outright. The Moran Non is impregnable, Elrond declared, his voice firm. No force small enough to remain hidden could breach it, and no army large enough to challenge it could be mustered in secret. Gandalf nodded, adding, Sauron's eye is fixed on the gate. We must avoid his gaze. Another option was to cross the Misty Mountains and approach Mordor from the north, via the High Pass and the Vale of Anduin. This route offered cover from the forests of Mirkwood but was perilous due to the presence of orcs and the watchful dragons of the Withered Heath. The north is too exposed, Aragorn said, his weathered face grim. The enemy's spies would mark our passage. A third possibility was to sail down the Anduin River and enter Mordor through the eastern marshes. This route was less guarded but treacherous, with unpredictable currents and the risk of detection by Sauron's eastern allies. The river is a road, but not a hidden one, Boromir argued. We would be seen long before we reached the dead marshes. Finally, there was the southern approach, through Gondor and Ithilien, which would require crossing the Anduin and navigating the Ephel Duath, the Mountains of Shadow. This path was closer to Gondor's defenses but dangerously close to Minas Morgul, the stronghold of the Nazgul. To tread so near the Witch King's lair is madness, Gandalf warned. The council settled on a route that avoided direct confrontation, south through Hollin, past the Redhorn Gate, and through the Gap of Rohan, where they hoped to find aid from Theoden of Rohan before turning east toward Mordor. It was a long, circuitous path, but it offered secrecy and the chance to gather allies. Yet, as the Fellowship would discover, it was far from safe. Frodo, listening to the debates, felt the weight of the ring grow heavier. He wondered if there was any safe path to Mordor. The Council's choice was based on the knowledge of the time, but hindsight would reveal its flaws. This story will follow the Fellowship's journey, exploring the chosen route's perils and imagining an alternative path that might have spared them some of their trials. The Fellowship set out from Rivendell under a grey winter sky, their breath visible in the chill air. Aragorn and Gandalf led the way, with Frodo and Sam close behind, followed by Merry, Pippin, Legolas, Gimli, and Boromir. The ring, hidden in Frodo's pocket, seemed to pulse with malice, as if sensing the journey ahead. Their first challenge was the Misty Mountains. The Council had chosen to attempt the Redhorn Gate, a high pass near Caradhras, to avoid the longer route through the Gap of Rohan, which was too close to Isengard and Saruman's growing power. But Caradhras was no easy crossing. The mountain was ancient, its peaks cloaked in snow, and its spirit, some said, was hostile to intruders. As the Fellowship climbed, the weather turned against them. A fierce blizzard descended, whipping snow into their faces and burying the path. Legolas, light-footed, scouted ahead, but even he struggled against the wind. "This is no natural storm," he shouted over the gale. "Caradhras does not welcome us." Gandalf's face was grim. "The mountain's malice is stirred, perhaps by the ring itself," he said. Frodo shivered, feeling the ring's weight as if it were pulling him into the snow. Boromir, ever practical, argued for retreat. "We cannot fight a mountain," he said. "There must be another way." The Fellowship was forced to turn back, their strength sapped by the cold. Hours later, battered and exhausted, they regrouped at the foot of the mountain. Gandalf proposed an alternative, the Mines of Moria, a dark and dangerous path beneath the mountains. Aragorn's eyes darkened at the mention of Moria, but he said nothing. Frodo, sensing the wizard's resolve, agreed, though his heart misgave him. The decision to attempt Caradhras was a costly one. The storm delayed them, drained their resources, and exposed them to the elements. But was it the worst choice? An alternative might have been to take the high pass further north, a lower crossing used by travelers to Mirkwood. The high pass was less treacherous than Caradhras but longer and more exposed to orc patrols from Gundabad. Had the Fellowship chosen this route, they might have avoided the storm but faced ambushes in the open wilds. Another option was to bypass the mountains entirely and head south earlier, toward the Gap of Rohan. This would have kept them in the open, under the watchful eyes of Saruman's spies, but it might have spared them the ordeal of Moria. The Council had rejected this path due to Saruman's treachery, but at this stage, the Fellowship did not know the full extent of his betrayal. As they descended toward Moria, Frodo wondered if the Council had underestimated Caradhras. The mountain had nearly killed them, and now they faced an even darker road. The ring seemed to hum with satisfaction, as if it thrived on their misfortune. The gates of Moria loomed before the Fellowship, ancient and foreboding. The once great dwarf kingdom was now a tomb, its halls silent save for the echoes of forgotten battles. Gandalf deciphered the riddle on the doors, "Speak, friend, and enter," and the Fellowship stepped into the darkness. The Mines of Moria were a labyrinth of tunnels and chasms, lit only by Gandalf's staff and the faint glow of torches. Gimli, eager to see the halls of his kin, was soon silenced by the oppressive atmosphere. The air was stale, and the shadows seemed to move. Frodo's hand strayed to the ring, its presence a constant reminder of their mission. Their journey through Moria was marked by dread. They found the tomb of Balin, Gimli's kinsman, and a record of the dwarf's doomed attempt to reclaim the mines. They were overrun, Gandalf said, reading the tattered book. Orcs, oh, and something worse. Frodo's heart sank. The ring felt heavier, as if it sensed the danger. The Fellowship's fears were soon realized. A horde of orcs attacked, their drums echoing through the halls. Legolas's arrows and Aragorn's sword cut through the enemy, but the orcs were relentless. Then came the Balrog, a demon of fire and shadow, its presence filling the chamber with terror. Gandalf faced the creature on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, shouting, "You shall not pass." In a blaze of light and flame, he fell, taking the Balrog with him. The Fellowship fled Moria, grief-stricken and leaderless. Frodo felt the loss of Gandalf like a physical wound. The wizard had been their guide, their strength. Without him, the path to Mordor seemed impossible. Moria was a disaster, one of the Fellowship's darkest moments. But was it inevitable? Had they avoided Caradhras and taken the high pass, they might have bypassed Moria entirely. The northern route, though risky, offered open air and the chance to link up with allies in Mirkwood or the Beornings. Alternatively, the Gap of Rohan, despite Saruman's influence, might have allowed them to skirt Isengard and reach Gondor sooner. The choice of Moria was driven by necessity, but it came at a terrible cost. Gandalf's fall shattered the Fellowship's unity, and the trauma of the mines lingered. Frodo, clutching the ring, felt its malice grow stronger, as if it had fed on their despair. The Fellowship emerged from Moria into the golden woods of Lothlorien, where they found refuge with Galadriel and Celeborn. The Lady of the Wood looked into Frodo's heart, her eyes piercing. "The ring is a heavy burden," she said. "But you are not alone." Her words gave Frodo strength, but the ring's whispers grew louder, urging him to flee. Lothlorien was a brief respite, a place of healing and reflection. Galadriel's mirror showed Frodo glimpses of the future: war, destruction, and the Eye of Sauron. "The ring must be destroyed," she said, "but the path is yours to choose." Frodo felt the weight of her words. The Fellowship's route had brought them to this point, but was it leading them to ruin? The Fellowship left Lothlorien by boat, sailing down the Anduin River. This was a strategic choice. The river offered speed and concealment, allowing them to bypass the open plains of Rohan, where Saruman's spies were active. But the Anduin was not without dangers. Orcs patrolled its banks, and the Argonath, the ancient statues of Gondor's kings, marked the approach to Rauros, where the river became treacherous. As they sailed, tensions within the Fellowship grew. Boromir's desire for the ring became palpable, his eyes lingering on Frodo. Aragorn, now leading the group, was torn between his duty to Frodo and his loyalty to Gondor. Frodo felt the ring's influence spreading, sowing discord. The river journey was relatively safe compared to Moria, but it was not without flaws. The Anduin brought them closer to Mordor, but it also exposed them to Sauron's eastern allies, who watched the river from the Emyn Muil. An alternative might have been to travel overland through Rohan, seeking aid from Theoden. This would have risked Saruman's wrath but could have strengthened their numbers with Rohan's riders. Another option was to strike east from Lothlorien, crossing the Brownlands and approaching Mordor through the Dagorlad. This route was bleak and exposed, but it avoided the river's dangers and the looming threat of Minas Morgul. However, it would have required the Fellowship to travel through barren lands, with little cover or supplies. As the boats approached Rauros, Frodo sensed the Fellowship's unity fraying. The ring was tearing them apart, and the route they had chosen seemed to amplify its power. Was there a better path, one that could have preserved their strength? At Amorn Hen, above the falls of Rauros, the Fellowship's journey reached a breaking point. Boromir, driven by desperation, tried to take the ring from Frodo. "It is not yours, save by unhappy chance," he cried. Frodo fled, using the ring to escape. In that moment, he realized he could not continue with the others. The ring's influence was too strong, and the Fellowship's route had only heightened its danger. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli pursued orcs that had attacked, believing Merry and Pippin to be in danger. Frodo and Sam slipped away, striking out for Mordor alone. The Fellowship was broken, its members scattered across Middle-earth. The decision to stop at Amorn Hen was a critical error. The open terrain left them vulnerable to orc scouts, and the pause allowed Boromir's temptation to boil over. Had they continued down the Anduin, they might have reached Gondor, where Boromir's loyalty to his people could have tempered his desire for the ring. Alternatively, striking east from Lothlorien might have kept the group together longer, avoiding the river's isolating effects. The breaking of the Fellowship was not solely due to the route, but the chosen path amplified the ring's influence. The long, indirect journey through dangerous lands wore down their resolve, giving the ring time to work its malice. A shorter, more direct route, perhaps through Gondor and Ithilien, might have kept them united, though it would have brought them closer to Minas Morgul. Frodo and Sam, now alone, faced the Emyn Muil and the Dead Marshes. Their path was perilous, but it was also secretive, allowing them to slip into Mordor unnoticed. Was this, in the end, the only viable route? Or had the Fellowship's earlier choices doomed them to this desperate course? To determine whether the Fellowship took the worst route, let us imagine an alternative, the southern approach through Gondor and Ithilien. In this scenario, the Fellowship leaves Rivendell and travels south along the Anduin, avoiding the Misty Mountains entirely. They pass through the Gap of Rohan, wary of Saruman's spies, and reach Edoras, where they seek aid from Theoden. Theoden, not yet under Wormtongue's influence, pledges Rohan's support. The Fellowship, bolstered by a small escort of riders, continues to Gondor, where Denethor welcomes them, though his mistrust of Aragorn creates tension. From Minas Tirith, they strike east, crossing the Anduin and entering Ithilien, a land of forests and streams. Ithilien is dangerous, patrolled by Sauron's forces and shadowed by Minas Morgul. But it offers cover, and the Fellowship, guided by Faramir's rangers, moves swiftly. They avoid the Nazgul's stronghold and approach Mordor through the Morgul Vale, a risky but direct path to Mount Doom. This route has advantages. It avoids the horrors of Moria and the isolation of the Anduin. Rohan and Gondor provide allies, strengthening the Fellowship's numbers. The southern approach is shorter, reducing the time the ring has to corrupt its bearer. However, it is not without risks. Saruman's spies could betray them in Rohan, and Minas Morgul's proximity is a constant threat. The Nazgul, sensing the ring, might converge on Ithilien, forcing a confrontation. Would this path have succeeded? It is impossible to say. The ring's power grew stronger the closer it came to Mordor, and even in Ithilien, it might have torn the Fellowship apart. Yet this route leveraged Middle-earth's remaining strengths, Rohan's cavalry, Gondor's defenses, and Ithilien's secrecy, offering a chance to preserve the Fellowship's unity. The Fellowship's actual route was a crucible, testing their resolve and exposing them to unimaginable dangers. Caradhras nearly buried them, Moria claimed Gandalf, and Amorn Hen shattered their fellowship. Frodo and Sam's journey through the Dead Marshes, Cirith Ungol, and Mordor was a nightmare, marked by betrayal, capture, and near death. Yet, in its own way, the route succeeded. Frodo and Sam reached Mount Doom, and the ring was destroyed, though at great personal cost. The secrecy of their path allowed them to slip past Sauron's defenses, something a larger force or a more direct route might not have achieved. The Fellowship's trials also galvanized Middle-earth's resistance, rallying Rohan, Gondor, and the Ents against Sauron and Saruman. Was it the worst route? Not entirely. The Council chose a path that prioritized secrecy, avoiding Sauron's strongest defenses. But it was flawed, underestimating the ring's influence and the physical toll of the journey. A southern route through Gondor might have been safer, leveraging allies and shortening the journey, but it carried its own risks. Frodo, standing on the slopes of Mount Doom, felt the ring's final scream as it melted into the fire. He had succeeded, but the cost was etched into his soul. The route to Mordor had been a gauntlet, and though it led to victory, it left scars that would never heal. Years later, in the Shire, Frodo sat by the fire, his journal open before him. Sam, now a father, visited often, but Frodo's heart remained restless. He wrote of the Fellowship's journey, questioning the choices made in Rivendell. Had they taken the worst route? Or was every path to Mordor doomed to be a trial? The southern route haunted Frodo's thoughts. He imagined riding with Rohan's horsemen, standing in Minas Tirith's white towers, slipping through Ithilion's green woods. It was a dream of a less painful journey, but he knew the ring would have found a way to torment them, no matter the path. In the end, Frodo concluded that the route was not the worst, but it was far from the best. The Fellowship's journey was shaped by necessity, courage, and the ring's unrelenting malice. They had triumphed, but the cost was a shadow that lingered over Middle-earth, a reminder that even the right path could lead through darkness. Frodo closed his journal and looked out at the stars. The ring was gone, but its journey would never truly end.